Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Pan Future Society podcast. I am your host, Sean. Today is Saturday, March 11th, 2017. Oh, nothing particular to yap about at the top of the show this week, so let's get right to the news of the moment. First item this week, a San Francisco-based company called Core has built an entire house in a Russian town in 24 hours. In this case, they used 3D printing. They have a mobile 3D printer, and they used it to create the house's concrete walls, partitions, and building envelope. Workers then manually painted it and installed the roofing materials, wiring, and other stuff, but that did not take all that long. And it's a 400 square foot house that's kind of round in shape, kind of a tiny home thing. The cost of it is about in line with what you'd expect, something of that size. And apparently they can also create different shapes and sizes and larger things than that. There's a cool video that they have that shows some of the printer in action. It basically looks like a giant robotic arm sort of thing. And they also did this, they had the work area covered in kind of a giant tent, but they did it in the coldest time of year, which is something you can't always do out in the open, building a house at certain times of year or certain weathers, so that could be an advantage for this method of building as well. Out of the cost, also, they said that the door and windows were part of the largest part of that budget. So the actual shell of the house was not terribly expensive. So here's another example of 3D printing on a large scale. I know there are some other companies that have done things like this, and it could be a great way to quickly create shelters for people in need or bring costs down eventually for those who can't afford something of their own. And now, it came from outer space. In space news this week, the week of February 27th, NASA hosted the Planetary Science Vision 2050 workshop at their headquarters in Washington, D.C. During the many presentations and speeches that made up this workshop, there were many proposals for ways to explore our solar system in the future. One of the most popular ones was a workshop demonstrating ways to explore Titan, Saturn's largest moon. This is the only other body in the solar system with a nitrogen-rich atmosphere and visible liquid on its surface, much like our own planet. And Titan also has an atmosphere that's actually more dense than Earth's atmosphere. This, combined with the low gravity of Titan, makes exploration by flying craft ideal, both with lighter than aircraft and heavier than aircraft. There are a number of proposed designs shown, including balloons, flying fixed-wing craft, and drones. One of the interesting possibilities of some of these, particularly in the drone category, is the possibility that you could land, take off in different places. Potentially, you could explore things much quicker. Remember that our rovers on Mars, although they've driven quite a great distance, some of them, and have been there for quite a while, when they drive, they go very, very slow, mostly because of the communication lag to them. We have to plot their route very carefully to make sure nothing goes wrong. So even though with all the exploring they've done, it's a pretty slow process. Flight over a surface could let you cover areas very quickly. And again, the idea that you could possibly take off and land in different places is a very appealing idea. So, quite possibly, if we do get to send a mission to Titan in the near future, it will include one or more types of flying aircraft to cruise the atmosphere of a Titan. And that is the news of the moment. This week we have the final, for now, Future of Food and Farming segment. Cell cultures and lab-grown food. There is a wide variety of food types being developed in cell culture systems, and there are several reasons this is a viable route for our future food needs. A few definitions to start off will be helpful. Cell culture is the process of growing certain cells in controlled settings, usually outside their normal environment. This process is not without challenges, some of which arise from the fact that growing cells for research is different than growing cells for eating. But within the confines of a container, like a tissue culture dish, a small sample of cells can be given the nutrients needed to survive and duplicate. In addition to nutrients, various cultures may use different substances, scaffolding, and 3D surfaces for the cells to grow on. Culturing can cover pretty much anything grown this way: viruses, bacteria, plant, fungal, and animal cells. Through this technique, scientists often maintain cell lines, ongoing regrowth of a batch of cells with particular traits they want to study. The process of cell culture is really quite varied in its techniques and applications, and I won't go too deep into this for the show, but I will link to some further information in the show notes. Cellular agriculture is the specific scientific branch of cell culture. Wow, say that 5 times fast. Specific scientific branch of cell culture used to create food and animal products from cells. Using the same elements found in culturing for medical and research uses, scientists are making meat, dairy, and other edibles. They are also making fragrances and substances like rhino horn. Many processes use yeast and bacteria engineered to produce the cell cultures. That leads to the core why of cell culture. What are some of the benefits and future uses of this technology? In the case of rhino horn, there's a group that is growing rhino horn in a lab which is biologically identical to real horn. They intend to flood the market for horn, crash the price, and hopefully save wild rhinos. Although I think it would go far to that goal for people to give up the ridiculous notion that endangered animal parts make medicine. However, many of our medicines do come from nature, and cell culture can be used to create the useful chemical compounds without having to harvest plants in the wild all the time or expend the space and resources to farm whole plants if you need only a particular cell line. Another why for cell culture food is to create nutrient-rich alternatives that appeal to different palates. Cultured meat, so far as it's come along, tastes like meat because it is. The texture, I hear, still needs work, but progress is being made. Soon, if you want real beef without the environmental impact of raising a cow, and you don't like soy burgers, you'll get cultured meat instead. Many of the other products being researched fall along similar lines, removing the animal from the animal product. And much like vertical farming, cellular agriculture is done in a controlled environment. This will have an impact on our food in places where the weather doesn't favor outdoor agriculture, and in future settings like space stations and generation ships where space is at a premium. Being able to grow and regrow food from a small sustained cell stock will be of enormous value. Some of the other research is using cell culture techniques to offer new ways of improving the taste and nutrition value of food, or new ways of creating customized things like fragrances or perfumes. Cell culture has been used a long time for plants for many reasons. production of large numbers of plants in a short time, conservation of rare species, plant breeding for different characteristics, large-scale pharmaceutical use, and more. I didn't read much in the way of lab-grown plants for consumption. It's not something that seems high on the priority list to come up with new techniques outside of what we already can do. No one is growing a vat of carrots, but being able to seed an acre of carrots from a few cells could be useful. These plant-based techniques, I'm sure, will continue to be important to future food production when dealing with climate change or off-Earth food needs. Here is a quick list of some of the foods and products being made or under development in labs. Meat, including beef, poultry, pork, and lobster, milk, egg whites, gelatin, coffee, horseshoe crab blood, fragrances, silk, and leather. The things in that list that are food mostly need no description. In the interest of not running the show to 2 hours or running the food series another couple of shows right now, I will leave the details to the websites linked in the show notes. Some of the items on that list do warrant a little more detail here. The coffee is an example of using yeast and fermentation to alter the flavor of the coffee. Fermentation is a way we've processed foods for thousands of years, not just to make alcohol, but to alter the food's chemistry, often drawing more nutrition out in the process. While not culturing the coffee directly, I believe the yeast themselves are cultured. The horseshoe crab blood sounds like an odd one. Horseshoe crab blood contains a unique chemical found in its amoebocytes in its blood cells. These amoebocytes can detect tiny bacterial traces and trap them in clots, finding bacteria in concentrations even as low as 1 part per trillion. This substance is used to test for sterility every drug and vaccine certified by the FDA and other things like implants and pacemakers. You certainly do not want to stick a pacemaker in somebody if it's got a little bit of bacteria on it somewhere. However, currently the only way to get this is to harvest the crabs. Not really crabs, by the way, more related to spiders. Millions of crabs every year are captured and bled. While this usually doesn't kill them, by one study about 18% of them died in the process, it has also been shown to make females less likely to mate. This has harmed the overall population, so a suitable replacement is needed. A company is working on a cell culture method of producing the amoebocytes, no crabs needed. In similar ways, other researchers are tackling making silk and leather. Some cell culture techniques could replace the need to kill an animal, or replace a process that's extremely labor-intensive and complex, like harvesting silk. Cellular agriculture is another of the many new and growing ways we will be able to farm and keep food on the table and medicine in the medicine cabinet far into the future, here on Earth or among the stars. All right, that is the show for this week. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. Thank you for emailing and reviewing on iTunes and all those things. Please do come to the website panfuture.org for all the show notes and links to things that I talked about in the show. From the website, you can also find links to sources for the podcast, where you can download it or stream it. You can find the Facebook page and the Twitter page. I do tweet quite a bit, quite a few retweets, things that don't quite make the news segment or the blog. I will retweet them so you can hear about all the cool stuff that's always going on in the world of futurism and science. And as always, I will talk to you again in the future.